Hello, my fair citizens. My name is Strider Stone. I'm the mayor of Sodium City. Daily YouTube videos are back. Finally. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, bell notification so you don't miss a single video. But then in the description below, subscribe to the Sodium City channel. That has the top 10s, the podcast, the MTG news series. It's got a bunch of fun stuff over there that's separate from gameplay. Speaking of separate from gameplay, we are trying a brand new video format where we have the deck tech and stats in one video, then all the games in a video later on in the day. Now, I think this is a really cool idea because some people like to see the deck tech and the stats and get really deep into it, but then a lot of people just want to see the gameplay. So I figured I could split those two up, but then also for the deck tech and the stats, I can go deeper into those specific things to kind of scratch the itch of the people who want to get deeper into the decks, and then probably go a little bit more into the budget side of things so I can give you the core of the deck and then possibly give you suggestions for budget options. So let me know how you like the new format in the comments section below. If you are watching this 12 hours after this is published, then you can click on that card at the top right hand corner of the screen that pops out and you will get shot over to the gameplay video. If you are here right now as it's published, you're gonna have to wait 12 hours for gameplay. Get jebaited. We're going to bring the clap back. Now, don't worry, I just had no good way to do the transition in this one, okay? I just didn't have a way, all right? So get off my fucking back. This deck is Reidane wins. It's called that because, well, Reidane just won us so many games. Her and her shield were just obliterating everyone, debating people. It's so good. Preventing the damage and then increasing the mana cost, everything, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. So Reidane is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer with vigilance. It's very, very good in and of itself without any passive abilities. It is legendary, so that part kind of sucks, but it does have a couple paragraphs because no good card is a good card without paragraphs, right? So snow lands our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Now, this isn't always useful, but when it is, it's amazing and it's hilarious. The second part is what we care about most. The second part is non-creature spells your opponents cast with mana value 4 or more cost 2 colorless more to cast. This deck is revolved around legendaries. It doesn't run Dollhouse at all, but it still gets the job done regardless. Now, Kaya the Inexorable is one of the key cards, if not the key card in this deck, because once we can alter, we're able to cast any legendary from our graveyard, exile, or hand for free, for absolutely freezies. It's amazing. It's a fantastic one, again, since our entire deck is legendaries. It's just unlimited value. It's free real estate. Kaya is a 5-mana planeswalker that comes into the battlefield with 5 loyalty. Her +1 is very, very nice here. And it's not very good in a lot of scenarios, but in this particular deck, we have some hidden synergy that we'll go over in just a minute. But her +1 is put a ghost form counter on up to 1 target non-token creature. It gains when this creature dies or is put into exile, return it to its owner's hand and create a 1/1 spirit token creature with flying. What could we possibly have that synergizes that's even worth mentioning with this, you ask? Well, Hope of Ghirapur. What is this, a dog and a cat fight? Who even comes up with these names? Anyway, so this is a 1-mana 1/1 with flying. You can sacrifice it, and until your next turn, target player who is dealt combat damage by this her and purr and gur can't cast non-creature spells. Now, if this has a ghost form counter on it, we can attack, sacrifice it, it gets put back into our hand, and then we play it again. The next turn, since I can't put any non-creature spells on the battlefield, like no planeswalkers, they can't cast a board wipe, they can't do they can't do anything. They really can't do anything unless they have a creature that also has reach or another flyer or something that fights it. There's not really anything they can do, right? So we're going to sacrifice it, make it so they can't play any non-creature spells until our next turn, and then we're going to attack again, sacrifice it. It keeps going back into our hand because we keep having that Kaya put a ghost form counter on it, and it's just an endless loop of your opponent not being able to cast any non-creature spells, except for between the times of your upkeep and after your combat phase. That's the only time they can play non-combat spells. So it's a loop that's kind of like the old Teferi, the 3-mana Teferi, but not quite as powerful, obviously. Kaya's next ability is the -3. It's just a simple exile target non-land permanent. Now, it sucks because it's non-land permanent. Sad, but, you know, it can't be amazing, right? But her -7 is really what we want to go for. You get an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, your graveyard, or from among cards in exile that you own, of course. Now, you get to cast these without paying their mana cost. Now, the from exile part is the part that's going to be most important, but we're going to get into that later. The other legendaries that we have in this deck are Captain Eberhart, or Ebenhart, Oberredenbacher. I don't know, I don't know. But this card kind of ramps us and also kind of taxes the opponent. We have the Cellulite, which also ramps us and helps us dig for cards that we need. We have Loincloth Karn, which is probably my favorite Karn card by far. This is just great for card draw. However, if you have Kaya's emblem, which we were talking about earlier, you can cast the cards that the opponent chooses to be in exile. Surprisingly good synergy that kind of comes out of nowhere. Karn, Scion of Urza is a 4-mana, 5-loyalty planeswalker with a +1 ability. So right away we know that Karn goes to the gym with that 6-pack. The +1 ability is reveal the top 2 cards of your library, and opponent chooses one of them. You put that card into your hand and exile the other one with a silver counter on it. Now, once again, this card is in exile, so you can cast it with Kaya's emblem the next turn if you want to, or you can just keep it for later if you're dropping Karn down on turn 4. Even if they kill the Karn after you bring it out and do a +1, the card is still in exile, so it's still useful. Karn also has the -1 ability to get a card that was exiled with the silver counter on it and put it into your hand. The -2 ability is the one that we also really care about. This can create a 0/0 Construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for every single artifact you control. Now, we don't have too many artifacts in this deck, but with the amount of times that we can actually activate this Karn, do the -2, and the fact that we can cast Karn multiple times from exile or from our graveyard, these things get very beefy very quickly. I added in a Shalai, Voice of Plenty, because I thought she would be a really good way to protect everything, and she didn't disappoint at all. I think she was almost a vital part of the deck at some points, but she's a 4-mana 3/4 flyer with you, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control all have hexproof. So this is just ridiculous because they can't Thoughtseize you to discard anything that you have. They can't target your planeswalkers to do targeted destruction, and there's not a whole lot of AoE planeswalker destruction running around right now. The only thing that's big that people are running is Farewell, and it doesn't get planeswalkers. So it's very, very good, but obviously they would get rid of creatures, and then your planeswalker would no longer have hexproof, but, you know, that's situations. It also has 4 and double green. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which we will pretty much just never do because we don't have double green. The deck is mainly centered around Kaya the Inexorable, Karn, Scion of Urza, and Reidane. Now, I would also push for Hope of Ghirapur for the jank combo with Kaya, but it's not necessary. With those cards, you're specifically looking at 7 mythics and 3 rares. If you include the Ghirapur, then it's going to be 6 rares, but most everything else can be replaced. but it also depends on what meta you're currently running into. As for board wipes, I highly recommend putting in about 8 to 12 of them depending on what specific ones you have, but unfortunately, almost every single board wipe in the game is a rare or a mythic. But luckily, you don't actually have to have all the same ones. There's a ton of them to choose from. There's things from destroying to exiling, and for the most part, all of them are good. But here's a few at 4 mana that you can use. As far as destroying, you have Day of Judgment, Shatter the Sky, Ritual of Soot, Wrath of God, Kaya's Wrath. You can also include Doomskar. If you foretell it, then you can cast it for 3. You have Path of Peril that you can kind of include. That's 3 mana to destroy all creatures, 2 mana or less. Or you can do it for 6 to destroy all creatures, things like that. Now, a lot of board wipes don't actually need to be destroy. You need to have exile or --1. Some of the ones that you can use that are 4 mana or less are going to be Divine Purge, Cry the Carnarium, which is the only uncommon one on the list, Settle the Wreckage, Extinction Event, and Languish. I hate Languish so much. I just hate using it. I hate using it. It's not that I hate it being used on me, I just hate it. There are a bunch of expensive board wipes like the backside of Selfless Glyph Weaver, by invitation only, Cleansing Nova, which is great for flexibility, Fumigate, Blood on the Snow, Shadow's Verdict, and Farewell. There's probably more, but those will give you a really great idea of where to start and how many there are. There's so many. But hopefully you can find 8 to 12 of those somewhere in your collection. Board wipes are really good to have in general, so I recommend just crafting them. You can replace Hope of Ghirapur with Ranger Captain Eos as well. That is a 3 mana card, but you can essentially do the same kind of lockout with the Kaya Plus. You will definitely need some Planeswalker removal. There's a lot of things that you can use. If you don't have Fateful Absence, you can choose Baleful Mastery, which I actually like a little bit better anyways. You can use Vraska's Contempt, which is nice. Elder Spell, which I personally really like. I don't know how many you could run, but it also helps you ult Kaya faster, because Elder Spell also adds loyalty depending on how many Planeswalkers you blow up with it. So if you need 2 loyalty and you also have a Karn out, you can blow up your own Karn, give 2 loyalty to Kaya to ult your Kaya faster. You can do that. It's a good thing, but it is rare. You still have Confront the Past, March of the Wretched Sorrow, and Soul Shatter. All those are rares, but if you have them, some of them are pretty good, but there are uncommon and common replacements. Those cards are going to be Bloodchief's Thirst, Hero's Downfall, Assassin's Ink, Umbral Juke, Fracture, and then the commons that you have to choose from are going to be Feed the Serpent, Mage Hunter's Onslaught, and Grim Bounty. So again, there are quite a few different options for Planeswalker removal. As long as you have 3 to 4-ish of them, you're perfectly fine. Now, if you are going to go way more on the budget route, I would highly recommend keeping in at least 1 Thought Distortion, maybe 2. It is kind of hard to run 2, especially in best of 1, because there's a lot more aggro, but it is a 6 mana sorcery that's uncommon, but it can't be countered. This is really nice because it's really devastating against the control decks. But target opponent reveals their hand, you exile all non-creature, non-land cards from their hand and their graveyard. This is ridiculous, especially if you're able to ramp a little bit. If you are on like turn 4 or 5 able to cast Thought Distortion and you go first, they're usually going to be holding up a counterspell at that point in the game because you're having 6, 7-ish mana. They're going to think you're going to drop a Planeswalker, especially in the colors that were Han, because Orzhov is a lot of powerful Planeswalkers like Professor Onyx and Liliana and Kaya. It's got a whole bunch of things, but we can debate them into holding up a counterspell right into our Thought Distortion. If you are needing some budget ramp, dungeon map isn't actually the worst idea at all. Being able to venture into a dungeon later on in the game when you have extra mana can actually be amazing. You can get a blocker, you can get a treasure, which I don't really know if you would need later on in the game. You could do some scrying, you can gain a life. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do. but you can also use Honored Heirloom. I would personally 100% recommend using Replicating Ring. It is uncommon, but if you have it, I would recommend it. But if you only have common wild cards, you can use things like Letter of Acceptance and Network Terminal. Those are really, really convenient to have too. I made a sample budget deck list that you can use as a template to build your own deck, and then all you got to do is take a look at my suggestions from earlier on in the video, look at your collection, and I'm sure you can make a deck exactly like this. Now, my particular budget version has 6 mythics, so I saved 4 of them, has 13 rares, so I saved 40, and then it has 24 uncommons and 18 commons. So all you got to do if you want that list is click on that card that pops out at the top right hand corner of the video, and it will send you on over to the Aetherhub page. At the end of the day, this deck went 7 and 4, but we did have to make a change midway through the deck. It's actually kind of early on in the deck making process, but we had to remove an Urza's Ruinous Blast and add a Farewell. Now, the reason we did this was because we ran into a Shrine deck, and for some reason, I thought we were going to run into more throughout the day, which we did, so I'm glad I added it, but it did help more than once. So Urza's Ruinous Blast, not many people use it because it's just not used. It's not really that great, but you exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. So it's actually really, really cool, and since we're using almost all legendaries, it's just perfect for the deck. The problem is, once again, if they're running Shrines or Super Friends, it doesn't really do anything. So again, we removed that, added a Farewell. Again, Farewell doesn't actually hit Planeswalkers either, but it still gets rid of all artifacts and enchantments, and so we don't have to deal with anything, and we can just start from ground zero, which we have no problem doing once we ultimate our Kaya. Now, I'm going to start out with the losses because of some changes that were made in the deck, and there was a little bit of backstory that just needs to be told in order for it to make sense. Now, we lost to a couple mid-range decks, maybe a little bit of slower control decks. I'm not really sure what you want to call this one. But this one was really, really weird. Almost a singleton type of deck outside of a copy of the Triomes, maybe, a couple of the Triomes. But everything else was singleton. It was very, very odd. Blood Artist, Eye Twitch. They were just kind of bringing back a couple things. It was just very, very weird. But I wasn't able to pull any removal later on in the game, and they had both Liliana Waker of the Dead and Turgid's Lantern out. And when you're not drawing anything, and you've already taken a little bit of damage from some early creatures, Liliana Waker of the Dead just doing the +1, forcing you to discard a card every single turn, and if you don't, you lose 3 life. And then on top of that, Turgid's Lantern, which tap, each player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. So we're either discarding 2 cards a turn, or sacrificing a non-land permanent and discarding a card, or losing 6 life, something like that. And again, since we didn't pull any removal at the end, we just got completely overwhelmed. The other mid-range deck that we lost to was really more of a mono-green aggro deck. It just had big creatures come down really early on. It really sucks. Unfortunately, in this game, once again, I didn't pull any of my removal, especially early game, and so they were just able to get Yorvo and then play double Elysians and then play Questing Beast, and at that point, I was just done for. There was nothing I could do about it. Now, Mono-Red Cavalcade can sometimes be a problem, but it really just depends on what they end up drawing and what they end up playing. In this particular game, they top-decked a Toblerone. Now, I typically don't see Cavalcade decks with Toblerone, so every single red source that they deal damage to us with deals an additional 2 damage. And Cavalcade, every time they attack with a creature with power 1 or less, I take an additional 2 damage plus this 1 damage. So they have a 10 Street Dodger, which is a 1/1 with haste for 1, and it's going to attack to do 3 damage, and then it's damage in and of itself. So a 1/1 for 1 is dealing 4 damage to my face, right? And then, of course, they had 3 of them. There was a shock at the end for more damage. Scampering, so I mean, this is another 3 1/1s. These attack all at the same time. That's 12 damage. There's absolutely nothing you can do. This Toblerone coming down and then the shock on top of it, that was just icing on the cake. There was nothing I could do. I didn't have any instant speed removal. I think I was actually tapped out at the time, but I didn't see it coming, and sometimes that just happens. Now, the loss to the 5-color Shrine deck is really when I realized that I needed to add in another Farewell. So I took out one of the Urza's Ruinous Blast that we had and added one of those because it only exiles non-legendary, non-land permanents. And since all shrines are legendary, Urza's Ruinous Blast just kind of did nothing. So what we did is we just went down to 2 Urza's Ruinous Blast and went up to a second Farewell. So we just did a split of 2 and 2, and it did wonders. Now, the reason it did wonders is because we ended up going up against another Shrine deck later on, and we were able to draw both of our Farewells. Now, we didn't need to cast the second one because we cast this one, and they were basically done after that. They were very upset that we exiled all of their shrines and their graveyard. Sad. So, it is always a great feeling when your deck changes end up being 100% relevant, and especially when it's against a Shrine deck. I don't know why losing to a Shrine deck is so tilting. It's like losing to a Maze's End deck, but for some reason Shrines just feel bad. I don't know why. It just kind of feels bad. Let me know if you feel the same way in the comment section below. Now, we have Selesnya life gain on farm. We didn't have to worry about those decks at all. We also have mono white life gain on farm. These were all pretty much the same decks, the same cards. They just needed to gain life. We just needed to make sure we killed them. It was pretty easy because, once again, our Karn structs get super, super beefy. Really easy to plow over everything. This Selesnya deck, they had the Ajani, Heliod, Moon Dancer, Soul Warden. They had basically everything they could ask for except for the infinite combo with Skuriok, which I don't even know if people are running that right now. I haven't seen it in a while, which it wouldn't make sense if they were doing this without Skuriok. But this one had Coco, Skyclave Apparition, had Gaia's Blessing for whatever reason. But they had a lot of really good stuff too. We were able to easily come back from that. And then the mono white deck, they were able to get Speaker of the Heavens Angel tokens on, I want to say it was turn 4. It was so early on in the game. It was turn 3 or 4. It was really early. So that super sucked. But we were able to come back and win. The Naya deck that I played against was kind of sad. The game was just sad overall. They really just ramped into Zakama, which is cool. I love me some Zakama. Don't get me wrong. But they also had Experimental Frenzy. Basically what happened, they got Experimental Frenzy down after they ramped from Secretus Route and Treasure Map after that flipped. Once they did that, they were actually able to cast Zakama, untap all their lands, but they didn't really have anything. They ended up blowing up, I think, 3 of my enchantments and artifacts. But what I did right after that, I think I cast Farewell and got rid of everything that they had, and they probably had 2 lands in their hand because they just surrendered after that. It was an easy win. I kind of felt bad because I love Zakama, but also they blew up all my shit, and I was very unhappy about it. The Is It Spells game was just free. It looked like they had a handful of creature removal because even with their Pyromancer out, they weren't casting any spells. I had put down a Planeswalker. They blew it up with Soul Seer. They took an extra turn. They still did nothing, and then they surrendered because I had Reidane shield down, and they couldn't do anything with their tokens. It was great and hilarious. We actually beat Mono Blue Tempo with this deck. Now, typically Mono Blue Tempo is 100% a jank killer just because all of our stuff is usually more expensive, and they're just running things like Spell Pierce, which counters a spell unless you pay 2, which is so annoying, and you have to either play around that, or they're running Jwari Disruption, which is the same thing, except you have to only pay 1. And that happens still. Dive Down if you have targeted removal. That also sucks. I don't see that very often, but that sucked this game because that kind of messed me up. But luckily, I was able to draw out a lot of their counter spells from other things and come back and win. It was a great game, and any deck that beats Mono Blue Tempo is a super win for me. And as for the TLDW, this deck is great against all forms of aggro. We are a bit weak against mono red burn decks, or really any burn decks, I guess. There's probably a Boros burn deck out there somewhere. Also a little bit weak against control decks or really fast combo decks. But outside of that, we should have at least a 50-50 chance beating whatever deck that we go up against. This is the first time I've tried to split up the stats and the deck tech completely away from the gameplay. Let me know how you like this format in the comments section below. The games for this deck will be live in 12 hours from this video being published, so hit that subscribe button, bell notification, so you don't miss it. Thank you all so much for watching. If you made it to this point, it means you either really enjoyed the video or you fell asleep and I'm waking you up now. Either way, thank you for all the support. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, come out with videos 7 days a week.